SBC Media.
Welcome to the iGaming Daily Podcast, analysing the news from the betting and gaming industry all over the globe, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market.
The ICC Men's T20 World Cup got underway yesterday, but cricket's latest attempt to grab the attention of US sports fans came just hours after the news broke of the sport's latest betting-related suspension. The Cricket Regulator announced that Durham and England fast bowler Brydon Carse has been banned from all cricket for 16 months after being charged with placing 303 bets on cricket matches between 2017 and 2019. 13 months of the ban have been suspended for 2 years, but the 3 months of the ban to be served immediately could not have come at a worse time for Carse, who had been tipped for a call up to the England Test team this summer. I'm Viktor, senior journalist for SBC News, and on today's edition of iGaming Daily, I'm joined by Ted Orme-Claye, editor of Insider Sport and payment expert as well, and Martyn Elliott, project director for SBC Media, to discuss cricket's relationship with the gambling industry. But first, before we get into the topic, now is probably an appropriate time to mention the lead supporter of the iGaming Daily podcast. And that's Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution in the iGaming market, who whitewashed the competitor. For new companies wanting to hit a 6 and claim a first free month of Optimove, go to www.optimove.com/SBC to claim said month. The link will also be put in the podcast episode description below. Now, Martyn, Ted, thanks for joining me, guys. How are you doing? Ted?
I'm very well, thank you, Victor. Had a decent weekend. Ready to take on the week as usual.
Good to hear. Sounded like a true editor. And Martyn, how are you doing?
Yeah, very well, thank you. The first weekend without any domestic football, so good news that the Cricket World Cup has begun already. So exciting times for fans of the England cricket team, because I think we've got a good chance again. So I'd just like to ask you though, Victor, how popular is cricket in Bulgaria?
Well, not popular at all. I don't even think it might exist in some form, but it's so the participation is so low that I've never heard about, at least in my home city, of a cricket team. So I can tell you that rugby or American football is quite popular. Football obviously is popular. Volleyball, basketball. But cricket, I've never heard a Bulgarian team playing cricket before.
Would it surprise you to know there is a Bulgarian national team in cricket?
That actually surprises me, and it surprises me that you know it and I don't.
They play in this thing called the European Cricket League, which is not an official competition. I suspect there's an awful lot of Australians and South Africans playing in that Bulgarian team, but there is a team that will wear the Bulgarian flag with pride during the European Cricket League preliminary stage in September, I think.
All right. So are they playing in this World Cup or?
No.
All right.
No.
All right.
I'm not even sure you're in the qualifiers for the World Cup, but
there you go.
You've got to start somewhere.
That's right. Well, hopefully we can face England in a couple of years' time. I'm sure that's the priority of the national sports strategy in Bulgaria. But anyways, let's head into the topic for today. I've mentioned Brydon Carse and his suspension from cricket. Martyn, let's start off with you. Can you give us a bit of a background on who Brydon Carse is?
Yeah, so Brydon Carse is he's 28 years old now. He's a South African-born fast bowler who qualified for England through residency a few years ago, and he actually made his debut for the England national team in 2021, I think, and has played in both the 50-over format and in T20s in internationals. So he's a really good, promising player, and there's been a lot of talk that he would be called up to the Test team, which is obviously the highest form of the game. that he would get his call this year. It's a transitional period for England's fast bowling attack at Test level. Stuart Broad has retired. Jimmy Anderson, or to give him his correct name, our Lord and Saviour Jimmy Anderson, will play his last Test match very soon. And, there's a lot of players jostling to replace those two as England's lead bowlers. Mark Wood, Jofra Archer would be a great partnership. They're both injured a lot. So there's a really good opportunity for some of these young players coming through. And before this news broke on Friday, Carse was one of the ones who had a really good chance of establishing himself in the Test team. But those ambitions, unfortunately, on hold for him at the minute.
Well, really unfortunate for such a promising player. You gave a bit of his background. Ted, now can you bring us into the story itself? You've covered it on Insider Sport. Can you give us a bit of a background on that?
Yeah, sure, no problem, Victor. So as Martyn outlined quite well, Carse is a very, very promising player. He's been making a lot of appearances for Durham County and obviously the England national team through residency. He was charged with placing 303 bets between 2017 and 2019. Obviously, that's quite a significant number, really. And cricket, similar to football, has a policy where, this is certainly in the UK anyway, where it's governed by the Cricket Regulator. The Cricket Regulator has a very strict integrity rule, which basically says that no one who is competing professionally is allowed to bet on any form of cricket. It doesn't matter whether it's in your own country, it doesn't matter which league it's in, just anything in general, you're not allowed to. And I think that's it's something that this story does kind of have some parallels with quite a few of the high-profile football stories we've had lately, really, where you've had players betting on they've not been betting on games that they've been playing in. They've not even been betting on games that have been happening in their league in some cases, but have still obviously faced the sanctions that have come about because of this, because it's just flatly against the rules. I guess as well that you could, if we're going to get a bit more, not maybe analytical is not the word, but if you want to draw a few more parallels, I do think there's kind of some comparison here that can be made to the Ivan Toney case, where he was he'd been betting on various games in the lower leagues, and which were then uncovered when he was playing for Brentford, and just before he had the potential to play for England.
Sure.
Although obviously at the time there was never any comment made by Gareth Southgate or the England management or the FA that the betting allegations against him were any reason because of that, but the timing of it was quite coincidental.
And obviously the response from the football world was quite big. What has the reaction been in the cricket world?
Well, Durham have obviously had to acknowledge it. It's going to be a bit of a blow for them to lose someone who's such a promising player for a short amount of time. Although, as you said, Victor, the sentence is suspended, isn't it? So, he'll only be out for 3 months properly, and the rest of it will only apply if he's caught betting again. The regulator itself even noted that he'd been very cooperative throughout the investigation when he got asked about it and when he got presented with the charges. I think it sounds like he admitted what he'd done and expressed a lot of regret for his actions. So I think they're all quite happy to move forward with really those were the mitigating factors they considered. Obviously, I can imagine, as Martyn outlined earlier, the sort of England cricket following will probably be very disappointed in the news to lose out on the chance to see this. We've already said, is quite a promising player, so we'll lose out the chance to see him in action at this T20 World Cup, which has literally only just started. Sure.
And Martyn, let's get back to you. Cricket has a checkered history when it comes to betting scandals. How does this case differ from some of the previous headline-grabbing stories?
Well, this is very different. I actually have some sympathy for Carse here, which I don't usually have that much sympathy for players who get caught in these cases where there's an absolute rule: do not bet on your sport. He was quite young when this was happening, and he had a significant long-term injury during quite a lot of that period which he was out. So he had a lot of time on his hands to fill.
How old was he in 2017?
That's a good question. About 2021 he would have been at the start of this. So and he missed, I think, the whole or the majority of the 2018 county cricket season with an injury. So a difficult time for him then. And, the cricket regulator was keen to point out there was no suspicion of him betting on matches he was involved in, and there was no integrity, there was no issue around the integrity of the games that Durham were playing at that time. So this differs a lot from some of the other things we've seen in cricket. This podcast would have to be about 3 days long for me to list all the incidents that have happened in cricket. I mean, just looking at the most famous ones, Hansi Cronje, the South Africa captain, was given a life ban for his role in match fixing. A story which began with him accepting the gift of, I believe, a mobile phone and a leather jacket from an illegal bookmaker in India, and spiralled into him trying to fix test matches. So that didn't go down well. And then we had the scandal involving the Pakistan team. They were not match fixing, but 3 players were involved in spot fixing. So they were agreeing to bowl no balls at certain points in the game so that bookmakers could profit from that. And that was uncovered by the News of the World because it was in a test match against England. And 3
What
players...
was the repercussions against them?
Oh, the repercussions. Wow. They all got bans of 5 years plus. But also, they ended up in prison, the 3 players.
Wow.
So for, trying to remember his name now, I think Mohammed Amir, I think he was called, one of the quickest bowlers I've ever seen. So it was a real shame for him that he missed a chunk of his career. And he was very young at the time. Again, he was influenced by the captain. I believe it was the captain, but one of the senior players who told him, you'd get away with this. It's no problem. It's easy money. And there he ended up doing, I believe, 5 months in a young offenders institution, which is a terrible outcome for a young player who's pressured into wrongdoing. I think he was really harshly treated. The senior players, they should have known better. They should have known a lot better.
I agree with you, and not only it's a bad thing for the player himself, but for the sport in general. Yeah, I would argue.
Absolutely. And we've seen this. We've seen cricket actually take some fairly strict action. In 2000, the ICC set up an anti-corruption unit, and they hired the former Met Police Commissioner Paul Condon to run it. So they've put in place some really strict rules, and they have investigations that are extremely thorough into both match fixing and spot fixing, and the rules are so strict. It's an offence not to report to them that you've been approached by a bookmaker, even if it's just to ask for information. It's not to. It's not necessarily the initial approach. Isn't necessarily can you fix a game? Can you concede a number of runs in and over, that kind of thing. If it's just they come to you for information, you have to report that. You have an obligation to report that. And in fact, there was a Bangladesh all-rounder called Nasir Hussain, who's, I believe, still serving part of a 2-year ban for not reporting an approach from an illegal bookmaker around a T20 game, a domestic T20 game. Now, you would think that all this action has stopped the cases. It's definitely had an impact. You don't really see it so much at the highest level of the game, but there have still been incidents, even in the IPL and in English county cricket, but certainly around the smaller T20 leagues where, there have been incidents of match fixing uncovered. It's a really difficult thing for the sport to address, and it poses the question, really, are they catching so many people because they've put this system into place and they are really trying to catch people? A bit like in, say, cycling, they catch a lot of drug users because they wanted to clean up the sport. They've put a great effort into cleaning up the sport, so they are catching those people. Or is it just really bad? Is it worse than other sports? It's very difficult to tell the answer to that.
Well, as long there are actual efforts being made to balance the sport and alleviate it from such cases, it's still a check in my book. Anyways, before we continue with the conversation, we're gonna head into a short break, and we're gonna be back with you shortly.
SBC Leaders connects the gambling industry's top-tier operators and associations to share the best ideas, collaborate on solving the biggest issues, and push innovation throughout the betting and gaming industry. If you're an operator and want to join the discussion, visit sbcleaders.com for more information.
Hello again. Going back to Martyn. Martyn, I wanted to ask you, what about the unlicensed bookmaker sector? Does that remain a problem?
Yes, it does.
Short and simple.
There's a bit of a nuanced answer to this. One thing that's happened since the invention of T20 and the huge success of the Indian Premier League is the growth of cricket as content for daily fantasy sports operators. So there's a company in India called Dream 11, who are the number one in cricket fantasy sports. They have in excess of 200 million registered players on that platform, because cricket is the biggest sport in India by a long way, and also in Pakistan as well out there. So there's a huge audience for cricket. So the IPL is fine, it's one thing. The Big Bash in Australia is one thing. The 100 in England, all these things are they're packed with big names and so on, and they're ideal for DFS because the turnover is quite quick, the liquidity is quick, players aren't tying up their bankroll for long periods of time as there would be on Test cricket. So that's all great, but the seasons only last a couple of months a year. So all these fantasy sports operators need other competitions. So sponsored primarily by Dream 11, but not only by Dream 11, smaller leagues have grown up all over the world in places like Nepal, for instance. And what we're seeing there is that they're not just attracting the interests of the daily fantasy sports companies, it's also illegal bookmakers in India, because it's quite... In most provinces in India, betting is either illegal or certainly unregulated. But, that doesn't mean there isn't a culture of betting in India, because there really is. And the street corner bookie is a popular thing. But then at a higher level, where you're talking about bigger stakes going on, like, thousands and thousands of pounds or equivalent in rupees. I'm not sure what the exchange rate is at the moment, and that attracts bad actors. And those guys, the illegal bookmakers who are running their operations in India in particular, but also across other territories in Asia, have a real interest in fixing games and also in spot fixing as well. And that has developed into a real problem. So you've seen things like match fixing cases in the Nepali Premier League. So very, very difficult for the ICC to actually bring that under control in the smaller tournaments.
Right. Well, it's only natural. That the more the market grows, the more dangerous it attracts. It's not only with cricket; it's with every sport. When you look at the numbers, to round us off, Ted, can you quickly brief us, in your view, how would you characterize cricket's relationship with the regulated sports betting industry?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Obviously, in the UK, cricket is it's not the main focus for bookmakers. Obviously, the two biggest ones in the UK when it comes to getting visibility for a betting company are football massively and horse racing. Horse racing obviously is a given because it's a sport that's intrinsically linked with betting, obviously. And football is just by far the most popular sport across the country. Cricket obviously still does have quite a big following, but I think when it comes to marketing, it's definitely one of least focus. I know that Betway are a company that have had quite a few partnerships in this area, aren't they? I think they've partnered with like the South African cricket team before. I think they've had a few county cricket partnerships. Surrey springs to mind, I reckon. Durham County Cricket themselves have a partnership with DAFA. Is it mine? I believe it is. It you might know. You're a bit more of a cricket man than me, but is it they do some work with DAFA Bet, don't they? And they have they launched this DAFA News platform shortly after this revelation came out about Carse.
That's right. It couldn't in an announcement that couldn't have been worse timed in many ways. Hours after the story about Carse broke, Durham announced a new sort of streamed TV broadcast featuring the England and Durham great Steve Harmison, which they were producing in partnership with DAFA News, which is obviously the sort of the news arm of DAFA Bet, the bookmaker. So that attracted the attention of social media critics, shall we say?
Yeah, it's the sort of thing that is kind of is good ammunition for a lot of critics of the relationship between sports and betting. I think there's quite a good parallel you can draw there again, really, with what I spoke about at the beginning of this podcast with the charges against Ivan Toney and so on, because there were a lot of comments made around that time. Obviously, Brentford have a partnership with Hollywood Bets. And a lot of critics were saying, is it not hypocritical of the football clubs to be banning players for betting, even when it's not necessarily betting on matches they're involved in or leagues they're involved in, and then also having this visibility on the front of their shirts that these same players wear? Obviously, I think it's a criticism. I can kind of understand where the argument is coming from, but at the same time, I'm also a believer in individual responsibility at the end of the day. And if it's a rule of the sport you're engaged in, I don't think it shouldn't be too hard for them to comply with that rule when you are still allowed to bet on everything else as well as play at the casino and so on.
The salaries have to come from somewhere, and the reality is gate receipts don't cover the wage bills of top professional sportsmen. They have to have sponsorships and broadcast deals, and whether it's
merchandise sales. It's a mix. Yeah, you have to have a diverse revenue stream, don't you, to maintain something of like the Premier League size. Yeah,
well, I agree with both of you guys, but from what I've gathered from this conversation, you gotta have balance, and education is key. I think we need more education to prevent such cases from happening. And balance is everything. You gotta really find balance. But I thank you guys both for the time that you've given this podcast. It was really nice talking to you. And stay tuned for the next episode of iGaming Daily. I was Viktor Kayet. It was nice speaking to you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to today's iGaming Daily podcast, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. If you want to find out more about some of the subjects raised today, feel free to explore any of the sites in the SBC News network or check out the latest edition of the SBC Leaders magazine. Happy reading.